Halifax, a human rights hearing has begun in Halifax where several people with physical disabilities argued that the Nova Scotia government has discriminated against them by failing to enforce accessible washrooms in restaurants. They bolstered their complaint by saying that a public safety risk arises when these members of the public can't easily wash their hands. Paul Viano testified at an inquiry at the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission on Thursday. Viano, along with 4 other complainants, filed a human rights complaint against the Nova Scotia government for failing to ensure restaurant owners have accessible washroom facilities. Zane Woodford, Star Metro, at a Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission Board of Inquiry hearing Thursday, the province's lawyer Kevin Kindred argued that while increased accessibility was a good goal, this specific approach was dramatic and ill-suited. David Fraser, the lawyer representing the 5 complainants, countered that the Nova Scotia Health Protection Act currently leaves out people in wheelchairs, to the detriment of disabled individuals as well as the wider public. This question is squarely one related to food safety, said Fraser, adding that washroom access is essential not only for the health of the individual, but also for protecting the wider population against contagious diseases through hand washing. Article continued below. If the purpose of providing washrooms is so that the public can inoculate themselves in such a way, he said, then the public has to be read to understand and include individuals who might have issues accessing a washroom that might be down a set of stairs, or up a set of stairs, or on a different level that's not connected by an elevator. The public has to include everybody, including individuals who use wheelchairs. Under Nova Scotia's Health Protection Act, food establishments must have washrooms available for the public in a convenient location, unless exempted by an administrator. Karen Wong-Petrie is the Director of Environmental Health and Food Safety for the Government of Nova Scotia. She testified at a human rights hearing on Thursday on accessible washrooms in restaurants. Taryn Grant, for Star Metro. Karen Wong-Petrie, director of the province's Environmental Health and Food Safety Division, was the only witness called by Kindred. She said in her testimony that restaurant patrons' ability to wash their hands is certainly a food safety issue. We consider hand washing to be one of the greatest infection control procedures that's around. It's very effective, and for individuals that are even healthy, she said, adding that hand washing is paramount for restaurant staff but also important for patrons. There's a risk certainly to yourself, she said, referring to any hand washing limitations. And you're coming into contact with tables and dishware, typically, when you're in a restaurant, so you could be impacting what eventually moves into the kitchen or what staff are in contact with. Paul Viano, a Halifax disability rights advocate and one of the inquiry's complainants, also testified Thursday. He said that, in addition to being in a wheelchair, he also has a weakened immune system, and uses hand sanitizer dozens of times a day. Many other wheelchair users are vulnerable from compromised immunity or other health complications, according to Viano, and it's dangerous for them to be putting their hands to their mouths without a reliable means of washing up first. Article continued below. He demonstrated to everyone at the inquiry how his hands come into contact with the wheels of his wheelchair every time he moves or adjusts his seat. He said he touches those wheels thousands of times a day, and the wheels come into contact with dirty floors, sidewalks and streets. It's not just an accessibility issue, it's a basic human right of hygiene and not getting sick, he testified. Read more. Disability rights advocates welcome national legislation. New Canadian accessibility standard for buildings benefits everyone. Disability advocates say anti-straw movement isn't considering people with disabilities. Advocates say Kindred said there was no question as to the importance of accessibility in restaurants, but argued the complainants were reaching for the wrong tool to improve accessibility. The approach underlying this complaint, and that approach is treating any restaurant without an accessible washroom as a public safety hazard, and shutting down the business after revoking its license. We say that that approach is not the way to achieve accessibility in this province, he said. Kindred cited the Nova Scotia Accessibility Act as proof of the government's commitment to accessibility. The act sets a goal of achieving a fully accessible province by 2030. A complaint directed at a specific restaurant, the provincial building code, or the patio bylaw, because summer patios are specifically mentioned in the complaint, would get more directly at the issue, according to Kindred. Instead, he said, they're looking to the section of the food safety regulations that deal with washrooms, and arguing that the government should interpret those regulations as requiring washrooms to be accessible for wheelchair users. So the goal is good, he added. The tool is not the right tool to achieve that goal. Gordon Stewart, executive director of the Restaurant Association of Nova Scotia, submitted a statement on behalf of his organization, and answered questions at the hearing. He argued that restaurants are already working towards accessibility to meet the government's 2030 deadline. A reinterpretation of the food safety regulations to enforce accessible washrooms would be unprecedented in Canada, according to Wong Petrie. She said that in other provinces, as in Nova Scotia, washrooms are required in restaurants, but not accessible washrooms, specifically. Warren Reid, a wheelchair user, spearheaded the complaint to the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. He attended the first day of the hearing but did not testify. He told reporters Thursday morning that the best outcome would be the enforcement of accessible washrooms in all food establishments. "We're not looking for anything for ourselves," he said, adding that the complaint was in the interest of public health. The hearing continues Friday, with files from Canadian Press.